Hi there, this is a video accompanying the Joomla tutorial developing an MVC component, and it's the third video associated with this step of adding access control. And in this one we're looking at permissions for viewing. Now you may have noticed that whenever we were looking at our access.xml file, there's nothing here to do with reading or viewing. There's no core.view or anything like that. And that's because viewing web pages and all the different sorts of items and hello world messages is associated via a different mechanism. And that's what we're going to look at in this video. Now this isn't really covered in the tutorial, but it's kind of supplementary and related to the stuff that's in the tutorial step. So I thought you might be interested in that. So this is a picture of how access levels work in Joomla. And the key thing are these access levels here, which are represented by colored diamonds. And you can see them in the system by going into users and then viewing access levels. And there are a number of standard access levels that come with the system. I've put an additional one there called confidential. And the way things work is that on the right hand side here, we assign to an item, now it could be an article or a category or a menu item or a hello world message, we assign a viewing access level. We assign one of these here. And then associated with that access level, we assign the user groups who have got access to that access level, as shown by these columns over to the left here, these ticks and crosses. And then if we consider an individual user will be associated with user groups, and those could be directly assigned or inherited. So for example, here we've got we've got users, and if we take for example editor, we can specify the user groups that user is associated with editor. And it will also include those ones that he inherits from. So for example, if we have someone who is set as an editor, he will also get author and registered as well. So if we look at the users set of user groups, we can then go along these columns and see the access levels that that user can see. So for example, in our first row here, we've got a tick in this column, which is one of the user groups associated with the user, or we've also got a tick in this column here. So this user can access this access level. However, if we go to the second example, this access level is restricted to this user group here, and this user group isn't one of the user groups that this user has access to, so he won't be able to access something with an access level signified by this kind of pinkish diamond here. So on the right hand side then we can set various things against access. So if you look on articles, you can see this line here being access, and I've got one article here which is set against registered. So that means basically that the user has to be logged on to be able to see that. You can also set access against categories. So here I've set up a couple of categories with associated access here. And notice that you don't get the same sort of inheritance, asset inheritance, that you have with the ordinary access control. So you just get one kind of access associated with a resource. You don't kind of get something and then something else because they inherit from something else. It's just whatever is set against that specific item. And on menu items as well, you can get access. Here it is down here. So for example, I've got this restricted menu item, and if you click on it, you'll see that it points towards that article, article 1. Now if I go on to the front end, then I'm logged in here, so we can see that restricted menu item and click on it, and it comes up with article 1. Now if I go on to this article, you just change it so that it isn't restricted. I'm going to change its access over here to be public. Okay, I just save that and log out. Now you'll see that if I log out, I don't have access to that article. However, if I go back into the menu and see where that article is pointing to, oops, it's menus. That restricted one. If I get this form of it and do a copy and paste here, you'll see that this user, he isn't logged on, still has access to this article. Now if we look at the menu article, we've still got registered on our menu item. However, we took registered off our article, and the reason that it's working is that it's kind of bypassing the URL that you normally get. So if I log in again, and click on restricted, you see this form of the URL. Now if I log out, and it's going to continue with that form of the URL there, and it's going to reject it. And the reason it rejects it there, but when I go in with the other format, it accepts it, is because when I go in with this sort of format, it has to translate this format of the URL into the other sort of format with option and view and that sort of thing, and it does that via the menu item. So the system, whenever it looks at that menu item, it sees, oh, this has got access restriction on it from a point of view of a viewing access level, and this person isn't logged on, so they shouldn't have access to it. But if I present the other form, and I'll go back into the menu item and show you. Let's get this to work. If I use this form here and go back in, you'll see that he has access to it. So the main point I'm getting across is that if you've got data in a database table, or like our hello world messages, which you want to restrict from, say, people who aren't logged on. You want to restrict them from seeing them. It's not really good enough just to restrict the access on the menus. You really also have to restrict the access at the individual item level. In other words, we have to actually put the access restriction on the hello world message, not just on the menu item that points to that. Hopefully that's clear enough. Now those are really referring to kind of access levels associated with the front end, but you can also set them on the back end. And the easiest way to maybe see that is going through to the modules. So here we're looking at the modules for the administrator side of the website, and you can see a lot of these have got access set to special, including, for example, our administrator menu itself. So if someone comes on and they don't have access to special, they won't see these things, including the administrator menu on the back end. So that's basically the way it works for Joomla. As I said, we have these access levels. On the one side, we set the item. We set its access level to be one of these. On the other side, we've got the user groups that have access to that access level. And from our user, then our logged on user, we can determine the user groups and check if he belongs to one of the user groups that has got access to that access level. So what does that mean for our code? Well, the good news is that all of this stuff over the left-hand side is automatically done for us. So we can go on to the back end here. We can set up our user with his user groups there, and we can also set up our access levels. So for example, I've set a custom one here, and this is all sort of done for us already. So what we have to do in our code, we have to do two things. We have to provide the means whereby the administrator can set that access level against one of our hello world messages. So for example, if we go back to content and articles, and we click on one of the articles, we have to provide this file, or this field here, that the administrator can set against a particular hello world message or whatever we're using there. And obviously then we have to store that in the database. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is we need to check the access level. So the fact that there's a database field there called access doesn't necessarily mean that it all works by magic. We still have to do the checks in our code to verify that the access level that we've set against our item is permissible, is accessible from the currently logged on user. And the key method that enables us to do that is this thing down at the bottom. JFactory get user will return to us a user object of this form JUser. And the method we're going to call is get authorized view levels. And if we look at get authorized view levels here, oops, I'll just zoom in a bit. So this is a method which we call on our JUser object, what we get back from JFactory get user. And when we call it, what it will return will be an array of the authorized access levels for the logged on user. In other words, it will give us an array of the access levels that this user has got access to. So in this case, we see that the user has got this user group here, so he's got access to that. He hasn't got this user group here, so he doesn't have access to that. He's got this user group here, so he's access to this. He doesn't have access to this, because he doesn't have that user group, and he's got access to that. So basically what it will return will be an array consisting of these three IDs of those three access levels, and it will be these three IDs associated over here. So that's the idea. Then what we would do is we would check for the record that we've got in the database, it's got an access level. Is the access level that we've got against our record one of the set of authorized access, the view levels that this user has? And if it is, then we'll allow him to see that record. If it isn't, then we'll not allow him to do that. And we can have a look at the com content code for this. So the com content code I've just brought into my editor here. So this is the file which is on the site side of things for com content, and it's a model associated with a single article. So this is the model which is responsible for getting a single article for a web page. And here's the code. User is equal to jfactory get user, so we're getting a juser object. Then we're calling this get authorized view levels here. So we're calling our function here. Now it's actually being called groups there, which gives you the impression that we're talking about user groups here, but it's not. It's maybe a badly named variable there. We're talking about access levels. So we're not talking about these things here. We're talking about an array of access levels here. And then what it's doing is it's looking at data. Now data, if we go back up here, is here. Data is the data associated with the record which we've just loaded in from the database. And we can get the various fields of that. We're looking here at category ID field. If it hasn't got a category associated with it, then what it's doing is it's looking at the access field which is in our record. So what access have we set in our record, and is that ID that we've set in our record in the set of access levels that this user has? And if it is, it's setting this kind of property access view to true. And in the case there is a category, it's doing a similar sort of thing, but it's also checking the category access, and it's setting this to true only if you have both access at the article level and at the category level. And then this is our view file. So this is our com content view file associated with presenting an article on the front end. And it's got this access view here. And it's basically saying if it's false, then you're going to end up with one of these two things here. And both involve setting 403 forbidden. So you're not going to get access to that record if you have this access view set to false. So what you might want to do is try this for yourself. I've defined an access level confidential, as you can see here, and I've given it access I've associated with editor and special admin. If we go back to our picture here, this is where I've put the ticks for my confidential access level. I've put it in special admin, which is one of my custom user groups, and I've put it in editor as well, as you can see there. You'll also then need to add a new field called access to the database record. Now you can also put it in your params record or params field as well. You could put it in here, but most of the components seem to have a separate access field in their database record for that. I notice that I've put in them all set as the default of 1 because that represents, if you look over here on the right hand side, that represents public access. Now a little issue about setting another field in the database is if you're going to do that via kind of an upgrade, you need to increase the version number of your Joomlas. So if you're working in the same way as the tutorial, you'll be going from version 14 to version 15. And that problem with that is it sets you a bit awry for the next step. So you can go to the schemas table here, and I've updated this via, I've created the new field via an upgrade, so version 15, but I can just change this back to 14 and then it should be ready for any upgrade steps within the next step of the tutorial. So that's the first thing. The second thing is within the administrator, we need to add a new field to the Hello World edit view. So when we go on to, let me get out of this. Whenever we go on to our Hello World edit view, which is coming up now, we have an extra field there, access, and this enables the administrator to set one of those access levels against any of our Hello World messages, and that will then get reflected into the database in our Hello World database record. Hello World has got access 7, which I presume is that access level confidential. And the sort of field that you want to specify in your field XML file is this thing here, access level, which provides that drop-down list of viewing access levels, and it will just take what is in the table in the database, all the access levels that are on the system, and allow the user to select one of those. Now once you've done that, the code that we already have in the tutorial should work okay to store it into the database. So that's kind of like the first step here. The second step, we need to check the access level. So on our site side of things, in our model, we need to make sure that we're getting the access field from the database. So we need to make sure that if we've got a SQL query there, that we're including that access field. And then in our view, we need to get the access levels that the user belongs to by this here, and check that the access level that's set in our Hello World record, which in my case is confidential, is actually in the set of access levels that this user can get access to. And if it isn't, then we return forbidden. Just really in the same way as the existing code there on com content. So if we look at that on the front end, Hello World, I've set up a menu item which points to Hello World, and you can see I'm not allowed to view that resource. If I just go back here, that's because it's confidential, but I just want to show you that the Menu items, okay. So the menu item here, Hello World, is on public access. So there's no problem with the menu item. It's the fact that the resource or Hello World message has actually got that set in, that it's got confidential access against it. So if I log in and then click on Hello World, it works okay. If we similarly look at this here, this is the alternate route. And obviously if we put in the alternate route here, it will still work. But if we log out and try that alternate route again, it fails. And that's because the actual access restriction is set on the Hello World message, and it's not associated with the menu item there at all. Okay, so that's that. You can also set the restrictions on the back end as well. So for example, as I said, this menu, or sorry, the Hello World message is set up with an access restriction so that it's confidential. See, it's confidential there. And so that confidential is only got access to editor and special admin. So it does mean that if I go in with an administrator, which is higher up in the chain, you shouldn't actually have access to that. So this is an administrator. And if I present that screen, you'll see there's no Hello World there. Whereas if I go back here and close that, this is a super user. There's that Hello World. And if I instead go to Chrome, where I've got a special administrator, and refresh that screen, you'll see Hello World. So you can actually set up your access view restrictions on both the front end and on the back end, depending on what you particularly want to do. And if we just look at the code briefly for that, this is just my own code, what I've done. Here we've got the view levels. So sorry, this is in the model, our admin model, which is associated with that particular view, Hello Worlds, for presenting all the messages out on the one screen. I've got the view levels, which this user has access to via this call here. I've just converted that to a string using this PHP function, and then I've restricted my query where a.access, whatever access is in our record, is in that set of view levels that the user has access to. So that will weed out any which the user doesn't have access to. And in the case of our administrator here, our administrator doesn't have access to anything with a access level of confidential, so it's weeded out that. Oops. And the only other little thing here is if you have super user privilege, you should really be able to see everything. So if it's not super user, you go through this. Okay, so that's viewing and access levels and that, and hopefully that's been some use. Thanks very much for watching. Bye.